Hi, guys. How are y'all doing? I'm not Sandy Pricer. I'm Jeannie Summers, and I'm standing in for Sandy tonight because she's not available. I wanted to remind everyone to keep your buttons muted and keep your cameras on. And we have Susie Grant with us tonight, and she's going to be talking about animal safety. She's an animal expert with the Tennessee Aquarium. So I'm going to hand it over to her.
So I'm really happy to be here. I did used to work at the aquarium. I have, in the last year, I no longer work at the aquarium. Instead, I have helped open a forest school where we are outside and running into all different kinds of animals, just as we turn over rocks and look under logs and see what is all out there. But just to kind of give you a little bit of background on me, I went to college in Kentucky and got a degree that focused in native plants and animals, and worked at the Tennessee State Parks for a couple of summers, worked as a naturalist where I did a lot of wildlife rehabilitation. So got a lot of different experiences with a lot of different types of animals, and then worked at the aquarium for over 25 years. And part of my job responsibilities was to take care of the education animal collection that we had there. So and then personally, my family has taken in just about any kind of stray, whatever animal it is that needs a new home, for many years. So we currently have 2 dogs, 2 cats, 3 lizards, a tarantula, and some fish. And we're getting a new snake that needed a new home tomorrow, I think. So we just kind of take in and care for whatever we need to. So now you know a little bit about me. How many of you all have pets of your own? What kind of animals do you have as pets?
Y'all can unmute and answer.
We have 2 dogs.
Great. So it looks like most people have dogs, and that's one of the most common pets that we can have. And dogs, and with any kind of pets can be really beneficial to us as people. What are some of the benefits that you have experienced? Oh, we're going to go ahead. We've got a slide presentation we can put up there. Sorry. I'm new at Zoom things too, so you all have to be patient with me. First of all, as we start this, I have to say I'm not good with technology, so my son Josh helped me with putting this together. So if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have the slideshow. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay. So some of the most common types of animals, or some of the most common animals that people have as pets, are dogs and cats. And then you can get into some of the more what we call exotic animals, or a little bit different types of animals as pets. And those would include things like different types of reptiles. Snakes are a big one. Lizards are another one that people tend to get. And then rabbits and birds. And a lot of times people will have fish. But there are lots and lots. I mean, if you go to the pet stores, there's all different kinds of animals and things that you can get as a pet. But sometimes it's important to remember that getting a pet is not just simply going out and buying an animal at a pet store. There's a lot more involved in it. That means that you just need to do a little bit of research before getting a pet and making sure it is the right thing for you. And if we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. Having animals in our lives does different things for different people. And there's a lot of different types of studies out there that talk about the benefits of having something to do with animals, whether that's in your work or or at home. Some of the things, but there's also things that say you have to make sure it's the right thing, because an animal can help reduce stress. If you're feeling stressed out, having an animal there that loves you unconditionally, that wants to be right there with you, that shows you affection, can be really very nice. However, if you have an animal that you end up allergic to or is costing you a lot of money, well, then that might be increasing your stress level. But some of the other benefits of having an animal is that they do provide affection. They can help boost your mood. So if you're in a bad mood, sometimes just being around an animal or being out in nature can help release those. And there's one of my dogs helping us out with this. But it can help release those endorphins and things in your brain, the cortisols that help reduce that stress and can help put you in a better mood. They can also offer a sense of security, whether that's just when you're going out and meeting somebody new, or if it's security in your home itself. They can offer a lot of comfort. They can also help in a situation like, let's say that there's something that makes you a little bit nervous. It increases your anxiety. Maybe you're not so sure about storms or something like that. Well, then an animal can help bring you that comfort and help calm you down. They also are very good at helping to teach responsibility. A lot of times people say they want to get a pet for their child so that they can learn responsibility and learning how to take care of another living creature. They also provide a lot of companionship. For those of you that have pets, are there things that are not on this list that you get from having your pet?
Since I walk my dog, like, I don't know that I would necessarily go for walks if I didn't take the dog. So that helps me get outside and not just sit around the house all day, you know.
Yes, that's great because it gets you outside in the sunshine, which is good for you, or the rain sometimes. And it also is helping you stay active and get some exercise, which is a wonderful thing. Is there anything else that you all think of that you might want to add to that list? And if not, it's okay. We'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. Owning a pet is a big responsibility because our pets do depend on us. It doesn't matter what kind of pet it is, they all still depend on us. And if we can act responsibly, then that's going to help us with this being safe around these animals. They depend on us for affection. That means they need to know that they are in a safe place too. You know, just like we want to be in a safe place, our animals do too. And when they don't feel safe, then you're going to run into more issues and problems with aggression or potentially biting and things like that. It's because they're feeling the need to protect themselves. And so that's where that us providing them affection, and it's on different levels because you're not going to show the same kind of affection to a dog that you would to a snake or to a tarantula. They're all a little different, so you have to understand the needs of the particular animal that you're looking at. We also are responsible for their food. They can't get it on their own, and making sure that they have clean water, making sure that their health is looked after. And we sometimes don't think about how important mental stimulation is for our pets. We think, oh, well, it's a dog. You know, we can do a little bit for them, or like our tarantula. What do you do for a tarantula? But think about you. If you were in kept inside in a room in the same place all the time, you would get kind of bored. And when you get bored, you might act out and you might cause more problems, whether that's like for a pet, it would be tearing up the furniture or going, having accidents in the house and things like that. So we do need to keep their minds active. And that mental stimulation, people are realizing more and more, is very important for all different types of animals. If we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. Because when we're looking at getting an animal, to make sure that it's the best environment for the animal, we do have to do a little bit of planning. And so there are some things we need to consider before looking at an animal. And that would be, what kind of housing do you need for it? Does it need a lot of space? Does it, and that was one of our other, does it need a tank, like a fish tank for it? Do you need an enclosure? Do you need a space outside that is enclosed for an animal that's going to be inside and outside? What's it really going to cost to have this animal? Because there's vet bills associated with things like, if you have dogs and cats, you need to take them annually and get their vaccines. And you also may want to think about what other types of problems or illnesses that an animal may be susceptible to, because certain breeds of dogs are susceptible to different types of issues, whether it be with their joints or with their eyesight. You also want to think about, how long are your animals going to live? So we'll go ahead and we'll talk a little bit more in general about, or a little bit more specific about some of the animals. So if we'll go on to the next slide. So like with your dogs and cats, you do have your annual vet visit, and you need to get them checked, or you need to get them their rabies vaccine. Heartworms and fleas and ticks are some of the most common. There's also, you want to make sure that you spay and neuter them. And this is a part of animal safety. It's better for your animal. It can increase their longevity, as far as how long do they live, to be spayed or neutered. And it prevents unwanted litters of kittens and puppies, which is very important. As of right now, there's so many animals that are looking for homes. And so it's really important to kind of take all of that into consideration. And then we do have mental stimulation. Again, that's kind of their toys, but it's also training. If you can train your dog when they're a puppy, then that's a form of enrichment for your animal. And people also train their cats, so you can train your cat as well. But it's a good way of helping them be safe when you go to new environments, helping to keep them to where they're always learning. Just like we want to be lifelong learners, we want our animals to be lifelong learners, because through training, again, you can continue to add things to them. You can buy toys and things for them, but you can also make toys for them. Some of the things that we've used to make toys for our dogs and cats is just old towels, that if you take a towel and you cut it into strips and then you can braid them together, it gives dogs something to chew on. You can also hide treats in them. You could do it for cats as well. It gives something to carry around. You need to make sure that you have time for training. You need to make sure you have time for their care and like brushing them. If you have a long-haired animal in particular, you need to make sure that you're brushing those mats and things out, walking them. For younger animals, you need things like litter boxes or pee pads, because they are going to have accidents because they are just babies. You want them to have a leash or a collar, something that can, and you keep the tags on their leashes or on their collars, so that, or you can have a microchip, so that if something ever did happen, that your animal could be identified. Now, one thing that's kind of changed is people used to want to get cats declawed, but that's really not recommended now if you're getting a cat as a pet, simply because the procedure for declawing an animal actually involves taking off part of the toe. And so you could think about it almost like if you wanted to get rid of your fingernails, cutting your fingers off at the first knuckle. And so right now, for their own safety and for their own health, they don't recommend that you declaw your cats anymore. All right, we're going to move over, if we change our slide. Hang on one second. see. So we're going to look at reptiles because that's one that has gained a lot of popularity to get lizards and snakes. It's very important to do research there to find out how much space these animals are going to need, what they're going to eat, what are you going to be really okay with? Because if you want to have an animal again, in order to keep that, to be safe around that animal and to keep that animal safe, because it does go two ways, that we need to make sure they have the right and proper food. Are you willing to feed a snake rodents? And if you are, what does that look like? A lot of times people will think, oh, well, I can just go buy a rat and throw it in the enclosure with my snake. And that is one way of taking care of and feeding them. However, it's not the safest way for your snake, nor is it a safe way for you, because for the snake's point of view, every year, pet snakes are killed by rodents that people have put in to feed them. Because if the snake is not ready to eat right then, that rodent can scratch, can bite, can break the neck of the snake. And so it's really not recommended that you use live mammals like rats. So then you got to figure out, well, where do I get frozen rodents? And am I willing to have rats in my freezer next to the food that I'm eating? So it's just something to consider. Also, looking at things, it's like, well, how big are they going to get? Some of the snakes that we've gotten in the past that I had at one time a boa constrictor that was 10 feet long, and she weighed nearly 50 pounds. And part of it was that where she came from before I got her is the people who had gotten her wanted her as a snake, but didn't really take into consideration how big she was going to get and what that might look like as far as housing her and feeding her. Now she had a great disposition, so that wasn't a problem. It was just more like, well, what do we do? And then how long is she going to live? Because some of these animals are very long lived. Some of these snakes can live 25 plus years. And so if you have a long lived animal, what are you going to do when you go off to college or when you get married? Is your spouse going to be happy for you to have a 10-foot snake there? And it's not just the snakes. A lot of the lizards can be very long lived. One of our lizards that we adopted is over 15 years old. And she was again adopted out of a bad situation where the animals in the care were not being cared for properly. And so we were able to provide her with a good home. And she's done really, really well. But it's a lifelong commitment for the animal. They may not outlive us, but they can live for a very long time. So there's just on the slide, there's a couple of other, there's some other things that you might need to consider if you're looking at something like a reptile as a pet. And I know I'm kind of talking fast, but if you all have any questions, please make sure that you just interrupt me and let me know, because I'd be happy to answer questions for you. Okay. And we'll move on to the others. Sometimes people think about birds, and it's really cool to have an animal that will talk back with you, like some of the parrots. But again, those can be very long lived as well. Some of our parrots can live to be 80 years old. And so they may outlive us. And so there are many instances where people have to consider what's going to happen with their pet, especially their birds, in their will. So is there somebody who can take it on? And then they don't always have the best dispositions, or they don't accept everybody. My brother tried to adopt a parrot that needed a new home, and because his wife was very interested in it, but the bird hated his wife and only liked him. And so the parrot would bite at his wife every time she tried to do anything with him. And they have very strong beaks. I mean, their beaks are designed for cracking open nuts and things like that. And so it's not a small thing to get bitten by something like that. So just a lot to consider. And again, you can see some of the other things that you might need to consider if you're looking at other types of small mammals or types of fish. And we'll go ahead. So when we think about, if we'll go ahead to the next slide, when we think about safety, we can look at our pets, and some of that is what is safe for them. But another thing that we think about when we're talking about animal safety, if we'll go ahead and go to the next slide, is what do you do when you come across an animal that's a new animal? Maybe it's a friend's animal. And if it's like a dog or a cat, it's always, or you should always ask permission if the owner is there to see, is it okay for me to approach your animal? Is it okay for me to touch the animal? And that approaching with caution is true even if it's a stray animal that you don't know. There's sometimes we see stray dogs or stray cats and we want to help them, but they don't necessarily know that we're out there to try to help them. And oftentimes for them to be a stray, something has happened in their lives that has put them in that situation. And so they may be fearful. They may need a little extra patience. And so making sure that we look to them or look at them in ways that show that we're there to be helpful. A lot of people don't realize that if you look at an animal directly in the eyes or you stare at that animal, that's seen often as a sign of aggression, because that's what a predator would do. A predator is going to lock eyes on its prey and is going to follow that. And so when we're meeting a new animal or we're trying to approach an animal, it's best not to look directly at them, but to kind of avert your eyes. If we're big, then we're also seen as a potential threat and can be scary to an animal. And so the better that we can get down on their level, get lower. We don't want to come at them with our hands out unless we're presenting the back of our hand, because our hand can be seen as a threat. And so there's some things to look at when you're seeing, if you see an animal, a dog, a cat in a parking lot, and you know that it needs something, you can't expect that you're just going to be able to walk up and, because you want to do the right thing, that it's all going to work out exactly the way we think that it should, because it does take a lot to help bring the animals into a space where they can feel trust and feel like they're going to be taken care of properly. Okay. If we want to go on to the next slide. Another thing that we can look at is, how do we be safe around wildlife? When you go outside and you're hiking or you're picnicking, and we're going out into the natural habitats of other animals. And you might think, well, I'm not going into the woods, and that's okay. You still run into the natural habitats of wildlife by going to a park where you're going to have squirrels and chipmunks, and they're very cute and lots of fun to have around. The biggest thing to remember that's going to help the most at keeping you safe around animals is being respectful of the animals, recognizing that you are coming and you are the visitor in their space, and you're potentially seen as something scary to them, because we are much bigger than many of the animals that we come in contact with. And so if you're looking at mammals like squirrels, we do have, there are squirrel feeders that you can feed, but you want to be careful about feeding human food. for a lot of different reasons. When you go to parks and places like that, you like go to state parks or national parks, there's always signs that say, please do not feed the animals. And that's because when we're looking at getting animals to come up to us and to approach us to take food from us, and they're getting used to our food, first of all, we're not helping them. We're not helping young ones learn how to hunt in the way that they need to be able to survive. If they're coming to you to get food, they may not distinguish between you and the next person that walks through that area. And so if they think they're always going to get food, then they may act what appears a much more aggressive fashion towards someone else. I know when I did wildlife rehab and we wanted to be able to release an animal back into the wild, back into their natural habitats, we had to be very careful. Because when they're little, you have to provide them with the stimulations and things they need. For an example, at one point, I had 2 baby raccoons that I was raising. One of them was so young and was so hungry, but it just could not seem to latch on to the bottle of formula. And so I had to tube feed it, which meant that every single time that I did anything to feeding it, I had to hold it. And that's important at that stage of the animal's development, because not only do they need their parent there caring for them, they even need their parent to help stimulate them to go to the bathroom. And so there was a lot of handling them. And then as they get a little older, they need stimulation through play. But there comes a point when they have to be allowed to be the animal that they are, to let their natural instincts come into play and not be seen as part of my family. They need to be part of their natural family. And so in order to do that, there would come a time with the little raccoons that I wanted to make sure that they were still getting everything they needed as far as nutritionally, but I needed them to have a chance to develop their natural instincts, which meant I had to back away from it and make sure that when I fed them, that they didn't necessarily see me, so that I knew when I was able to return them to their natural habitat, they were not going to approach a human. They were nervous, and they would not have even let me pick them up, even though I had done all of that handling of them when they were little. And that's important to their safety, because if that raccoon comes up and approaches a person and that person is nervous about it, the first thing they think is it's got to have rabies. If it's out and it's coming up to me, or it's not acting like a wild raccoon, then it must have rabies. And that becomes very detrimental to the raccoon in itself, because then they'll get killed to find out that no, they didn't really. Or if we go back to our squirrels, if you're used to feeding them, I knew someone who had a squirrel just run up their leg because they were expecting food. And if you don't have that food, then you might end up getting a little bite from that squirrel. And again, they have pretty powerful teeth. So the best thing that we can do for our wildlife when we're visiting their natural habitat is to let them feed on their own, maintain a safe distance from them so that we're not providing any kind of a threat to them. And then one of the big things that people worry about when they go out, if we can go ahead and go to the next slide, because then we're going to end the slideshow for just a minute, or we're going to end it so that I can bring out one of our other animals. But one of the big things that people worry about when they go out into the woods are snakes. And so I went ahead and brought one of our snakes out. Well, I'm trying to bring him out so that everybody can see them. Snakes don't have to be scary animals. Here in our area, we only have 2 venomous snakes. That means there are only 2 species that can, or 2 types of venomous snakes that can cause you really a problem. And those are the copperhead and the rattlesnake. Both of them are ones that you could come across when you're out hiking. And I have come across them in different instances, whether I am hiking or camping or things like that. but I've never had a problem with them. Most of the time they know when we're coming. They don't sense things the way we do. I don't know how well you can see our little snake, but you can see he sticks his tongue out. That's one way that he's sensing things. He's kind of smelling and tasting what's happening around him. They also use their lower jaw because they're low to the ground. And so their jaw is always resting on the ground and they're feeling for vibrations. And so most of the time they feel us coming before they can see us, before they can really smell us, and they're getting out of the way. When we've come across things like a copperhead, as long as we're not poking at them with a stick, that would be part of being respectful of them, is using, just looking at them, watching them, but not trying to control what they do. But as long as we weren't poking at them or messing with them, bothering them in any way, they left us alone too. They can tell that we're much larger than they are. And so they don't want to mess with us unless they feel like they have to. When people tend to get bitten by a snake of any kind, so like this one that I have is he's an albino corn. I don't actually know whether it's a boy or a girl, but this one is an albino corn snake. So it kind of looks yellow, but a corn snake is one that's native here. It does not have any fangs, like our rattlesnake or our copperhead would. Instead, it's a constrictor, which means that it's going to bite and hold on to its prey as a way of killing its food in order to eat it. And then they swallow it whole, just like our rattlesnake and copperhead would. But if this snake were to bite me, all it would do is give me a slight scratch on my hand, kind of like I ran through a blackberry bush. It wouldn't hurt much worse, and it would be about, it would look about the same. If you were to get bitten by a copperhead or a rattlesnake, then the first thing you'd want to do is try to stay calm and then go to the hospital where they can get the antivenom. You would know because you would have the fang puncture wound or puncture marks there. It's also important to know that they can do what's called dry biting, which means that they don't really inject any venom. And that's a way just of kind of giving you a warning to get out of the way. But you don't take it lightly. If you get bitten, you make sure that you go get help. And as I was saying, they do tend to give you some kind of warning. Oftentimes they'll say copperheads will smell like cucumbers. And so if you're walking through the woods, then you smell cucumbers out in the middle of the woods, then you might go, oh, that's kind of unusual. Maybe I'm going to be extra alert and I'm going to watch around. Rattlesnakes, they do have their rattle and they will rattle that rattle, and it can be quite loud to give you warning. Again, they don't want to come in contact with you. So when you're hiking, the way most people come in contact and surprise the snakes is that they step over a fallen log. Well, when that log is laying on the ground, it can stop the vibrations. It can make it to where if the snake is laying on the other side, they can't feel the vibrations anymore. And so can anybody think of a way maybe to avoid that? What would be an easy solution if you come up to a fallen log that you can't see on the other side of as you approach it? What do you think, Jack?
You could look on the other side of the log before you step over.
Yeah, that's an excellent thing. Simply step on top of the log and look down and see, is there anything there? Okay. Then another thing that you can do is, if you're hiking with a walking stick, is kind of tap the ground or tap the log before stepping over it. But I always tell people, and when I've taken groups of people hiking before, is we always step on top of the log if we can't see the other side. Just because, it's not that they're out trying to be mean to us. They're just trying to protect themselves, and we have scared them. Does anybody else have any questions or things about either what you might do for yourself to be safe around your pets, or to keep your pets safe, or with animals that you might find out on a hike or for a picnic? I know if some people say going hiking, they're worried about things like black bears or bears or coyotes, things like that. most of those animals that if you make enough noise, they are going to leave you alone. Black bears in particular, I've gone camping many times where we've taken things, and if you see a black bear, you simply yell and scream and bang pots together, and the black bear is going to go on, because again, they don't want to be around that. The only time is if you see a cub, you don't ever try to approach a cub, because the parent is going to be very, very protective of their young. And so if there's a cub, just kind of slowly back off, back away. Any other thoughts? That ends my official or my formal part of the presentation. So I would love to hear what your thoughts are or what questions you may have.
Anybody have any questions or any experience you want to share? No? Okay.
All right. Well, I thank you all very much. This is kind of an unusual way for me to do presentations, so I appreciate your patience. If you do think of questions or anything that comes up later, feel free to let Sandy know and pass those along, and I would be more than happy to try to answer them for you. I really appreciate y'all spending a little bit of your evening here with me tonight.
Well, we appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us. So thank you for volunteering to teach. And thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you all.
Okay.